The title isn't clickbait. You have most likely never seen or heard about this lens before. The Welmy 28mm f2.5 vintage prime lens. Finding one of these is almost impossible. I've seen, I think, one other go on auction on eBay since I've bought this one, and that's about it. Its origins are almost impossible to trace, and the company linked to it has very foggy origins. I first came across this on eBay about 2 years ago. The seller had added some images of the bokeh that you get with this lens, and I was instantly sold. It had this creamy, ghost-like effect, and I thought for £20 you can't go wrong. Now, stopped down, it's very sharp like any other high-quality lens. The mystery, its origin is seemingly untraceable, at least on the English side of the internet. Now, it has absolutely ridiculous optical characteristics when wide open, displaying shows of ghosting unlike any other vintage lens I've ever used. I asked Reddit about it to see if any fellow nerds had heard of it, which came out to a dead end, as the Redditors were only able to find out about as much as me from a couple of wikis which I have linked in the description. So, this is what we know. Welmy is an alias for a range of cameras produced by Taisei Koki KK. The company was created in May 1949 by the merge of Naremasu Koki and Daiyu Kogaku. The company, Taisei Koki, produced a handful of camera models before being bought up by the 1960s by Konishi Roku, at which point Taisei Koki had already stopped selling cameras under their own name. Online, I haven't found any references to standalone Welmy lenses, as the Welmy cameras seemed to all have built-in lenses. Additionally, Taisei Koki can be spelled in various different ways and was called different names in its short history, making identification of relevant materials, lenses and cameras a lot more complicated than for name brands like Nikon. And the only reference to Welmy lenses, prime lenses that are detachable, have been found on forums. All the wikis that I've been able to find, at least on the English side of the internet, only refer to Welmy cameras or lenses that are fused to Welmy cameras. And so the obvious question is, where on earth did these Welmy lenses come from? Now, the serial number, which on this lens is 790059, would seem to suggest that the lens was either produced in 1959 or in 1979. Now, a 1959 date of production seems far more in line with what we know about Taisei Koki's brief history, which is that they produced stuff under their own name until around about 1960, and that means that anything they produced afterwards or subsequently would have been rebranded under one of the parent company names. Now, the only thing that speaks against this theory is that when I bought this lens, it came with a Pentax K mount, which was only introduced by Pentax in 1975, which would speak against the 1959 production hypothesis. So perhaps the true production date is 1979, which then begs the question, why is it branded as Welmy? If all the Wikipedia pages that are findable online say that Taisei Koki stopped Welmy branding their stuff by 1960. Now, what's even more interesting is that the other Welmy lenses that I have, a 200mm f2.8, a 200mm f3.5, and a 300mm f5.6, all use M42 screw mounts, which makes them very hard to place. So far, I've online found references all own the lenses I've just mentioned, and additionally the Welmy Terionar 50mm f3.5, which one person, as seen on Flickr, seems to have managed to convert for use on mirrorless cameras, but this was a lens not meant to be detached from the bodies of the Whelmy cameras. Now, as far as the lens characteristics go, the crazy ghosting that I've talked about is only visible on the 28mm lens. I thought that this was unique to my lens, but a thread from 2009 on the MF Lenses forum would suggest that the user had the same ghosting characteristics as mine does. A user suggests that this is likely a design flaw that lies in the uncorrected spherical aberration, saying that it's probably a factory mistake. As my lens has the exact same optical defect, or characteristic one might say, it would seem that this is a flaw fundamental to the design of the lens and not a manufacturing or production error by an individual assembling the lens. Another possibility, as mentioned on my Reddit thread, is that it's a Frankenstein lens, i.e. a lens made from different parts of different lenses. But the fact that I own and have found 4 of these Whelmy lenses would suggest otherwise. I have also seen an identical 28mm f2.5 Whelmy lens go for auction on eBay, which I did bid on, but unluckily didn't receive. Which further disproves the hypothesis suggested by this user on Pentax K forums. So in the end, the true story behind these lenses is probably as one user mentions in a reply to my thread on Reddit about this question. In the process of some lens research a few weeks ago, I read about Makinon, which was a small lens manufacturer that began in a garage and eventually went out of business in the 80s, like, quote, many small Japanese lens manufacturers, according to the article. I imagine Whelmy probably falls into the same category and suffered the same fate, but with smaller production quantities or distribution. Or perhaps they primarily made lenses for other distributors and rarely sold lenses with their own branding, and some hard-to-identify third-party lenses are actually Whelmy's. This, to me, seems to be the most plausible explanation for the unidentifiable nature of this lens. But frustratingly, many questions remain unanswered. The Whelmy branding in combination with the Pentax K mount remains fairly mysterious. Now, obviously mounts can be changed on lenses, but it's not done that commonly. So it is quite mysterious, but one might assume that this lens was originally shipped with a screw M42 mount. The other point is that the optical effects remain to be explained. The ridiculous ghosting when shooting this lens wide open can't really be seen as characteristics and really rather as flaws. And the fact that this flaw shooting wide open seems to be consistent, judging from the limited information to be found online, across the lenses, would suggest that it was a design flaw when the lens was created as opposed to manufacturing defects. Which is fascinating. How did that happen? How did they produce a lens with such an obvious defect, how did they produce a lens with such an obvious flaw? Now, if you know anything, or if you know anyone, or could put me in touch with anyone who might know more about this very, very niche lens from 1950s, 60s, 70s Japan, please do get in touch. Because, honestly, there's pretty much no information about it online at all, and this is a mystery I would rather quite like to solve. Thank you for watching.